We're going to go to the UK and see Paul Hannaby. Can you set him up there, Dane?
Yes,
and we'll
sir.
Go to Paul?
Yes, sir. We're going to go to Paul right now.
Good evening, sir.
Hello, Paul.
How's it going?
And I want to put out a special thanks for Paul for stepping in to do a demo. My regular scheduled person was canceled on me, and I contacted several people, and Paul was able to step in and take care of putting on a good show for us tonight. So I hope everybody enjoy. And Paul, my deepest thanks about it.
You're welcome. That's no problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, what we're going to do tonight is what I call a sort of a winged bowl. There's one here which is made out of a fairly thin piece of wood. That's masseur birch. You see the figuring in the wood if I get a bit closer. So that was sort of part of a log. I normally start off with a long one. That's a fairly short one. Here's a half a log. This is lilac, which some people find in the garden, grown in the garden. That could be a start point for this. So it's a longer than usual blank, let's put it that way. So half a log is generally where I start, and as you can see, that's about probably 4 times as long as it is wide. So that's the sort of norm. I've got a couple of other pieces here. These are sort of slices off a bigger log of, again, masseur birch. So there's that one, which is probably about 3 times as long as it is wide. Fairly thin blanks, these. I mean, this is a piece that was sliced off, and there's another one here that's probably a little bit thicker. But I think they just make an interesting sort of start point for a bowl and something slightly different. So that's what we're going to have a go at, and I'll go for this one. This is the longer of the 2 pieces. The masseur birch, slightly longer. So I'll switch over to the lathe. I'm going to have a look at this. So I've got my piece of wood here. What I want to do is roughly find the middle of that. The reason for that is just so I get the same length of wing sticking out each side. Do it with a ruler or a tape. I've got a tape here, so I've got a 12-inch blank there, so 6 inches that way. And then on the width, we've got just over 5. So if I go there, that's close enough. 2 and a bit. So that's my start point. To mount this on the lathe, generally with a natural edge blank, whatever the size and shape are, I'll mount it between centers. So I've got myself a 4-pronged drive center to go into the headstock and a live center to go in the tailstock. This is a ring center. It doesn't have to be. I tend to use ring centers a lot. Just out of preference, I suppose. I mean, I like the fact that they don't tend to penetrate as deep as a normal conical point center, and also I generally rough turn a bowl. I'll put a ring center mark in it, so when I want to remount it, I can use that to remount it. Or if I turn the bowl and then turn the spigot away when I finished it, again, if there's a ring center mark in the bottom of that spigot, then I can remount it to turn that away. So that's the plan. So I'm going to mount this so the flat side is at the tailstock side, because that's going to be the bottom of the bowl. So I'm treating this as I would turning a bowl. So I'll mount the point I've just marked on the tailstock on the point there, and I'll bring the tailstock up to the headstock. So this wing is sort of mounted between centers, but loosely. I've already established that that's the center of this board. Let me just take this camera up slightly to give you a fuller view of where we're at. That's better. So it's mounted central lengthways, but with any natural edge blank, what you want to do is try and even it up in the sort of plane across the bed this way. So the 2 sides of the blank are fairly uniform, and also in the long axis, I want the two wings, the top points here where I'm pointing here, to be an equal height on both sides. So what I can do to check that is if I bring my tool rest in here, let me just adjust that camera a bit there. So I'm near the end of the piece of wood here, and just spin the blank round. I can see if it's evenly mounted both sides. It's not far off. It's I mean, it's a bit loose anyway, but I'm not far off there. So if I just put a little bit more pressure on that, I'm within 1/16 of an inch probably there. So that's close enough. If that was a long way out, I would adjust one of the two centers to try and twist that to straighten it up. But that's close enough, as 1/16 of an inch is good. And on the other plane here, likewise, if you really need to, you can bring the tool rest into this side. I've got it just almost touching here, spin the blank round, and it's about the same distance away each side. So again, we're good to go there. It's fairly central and evenly mounted. So I'm going to wind my center in now. So I'm putting some pressure onto those drive points. So a little bit more pressure there, and then lock that. So that's now ready to roll. I'll bring my tool rest around to the flat face. Essentially, I'm treating this as a bowl, and turning the bottom of the bowl and a spigot for the chuck. Before I go any farther with this, so I've got my tool rest where I want it. Just that. That's actually moved a bit now. I've tightened it up. I've got here, I can just get my finger in there, but on the other side, that gap's probably half. So that probably wants tweaking slightly. But now I've got the 4-prong drive driven in there, I'll actually loosen the point on the back rather than the 4-prong drive, and see if I can just tweak it that way. Closer. Needs to go just a little bit more, I think. I mean, now I've pushed a hole in there, I've got to try and persuade it to mount sort of on the side of that hole, and it's trying to draw itself back in. That's closer. That's good enough. So we'll go with that. Having said that, when I checked it first time round, I did it on the top of the blank. So let's just check that again. There I'm nearly touching, and there I'm nearly touching. So yeah, that's pretty good. So happy with that. Lock the tailstock down again. So bring that in. So I'm lined up across the blank. Always give your piece of wood a spin if you've got anything that's irregular before you turn the lathe on. The lathe speed is set to minimum before I turn this on. I try and make a habit of doing that with anything I put on the lathe. So if that piece of wood was to come adrift, it's starting off at low speed rather than at 2000 RPM or whatever the maximum speed is. So before I turn the lathe on, I'll stand out of the firing line, put my visor on, and start the lathe up, and then slowly bring the speed up. So if we work on a principle that that's a 12-inch blank, then I would be turning it probably about 500 RPM. Because it's a wing and it's irregular, I'm going to turn it a little faster. So I'm here at about 850, somewhere around that ballpark. So I've now sort of proved to myself that that's safe, and I can stand in front of it and turn it now. So I'm going to start with a spindle gauge. This is a 1/2-inch spindle gauge with a long fingernail grind on it. You can use a bowl gauge or a spindle gauge on the outside. I tend to use the spindle gauge for a lot of bowls of this sort of size, mainly because almost all my spindle gauges have that fingernail grind on, whereas my bowl gauges, if I grab one, a lot of them are like this with a traditional grind, straight grind, whatever you want to call it. So it doesn't have the swept back wings which I would need to use for a pull cut. I mean, obviously here I can't really do a push cut because I've got the tailstock in the way. To do a push cut, I would need to have my gauge over here like this, and obviously with the tailstocks there, that's not practical. So here I'm working with a pull cut to start shaping the outside of this bowl, wing, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's fairly secure. So I'm going to start shaping the outside. Or obviously this is like a propeller, so keep your fingers behind the rest. So don't let your fingers protrude over the edge of that rest, for obvious reasons. So I'm going to start fairly near the outside and just do a moderately light cut. Shape wise, you can sort of shape it how you like. I mean, here I'm thinking I'll probably aim for an OG sort of curve. I can't really see a lot of what I'm turning here. It's always that case that you're turning a propeller, and when it's spinning you can't see a lot of it. So I'll take a fairly light cuts. Just stop there and see how we're proceeding, so you can see where the cut's happening. If I go to that, we can have an inset as well, so we can see. Let me just.
That looks good.
Up there, so you can see the wing as I'm. So the wing here, you can see where that OG is starting to sort of form, and I'm thinning down the edge here. What I want is to take that flat away, so I've got a complete curve on the edge of the bowl. But as it's an OG, I can work on the corner and then work on the center section. One tip when you are working on sort of interrupted edges like this, if you want to call it that, and you can't see exactly where the edge is, I'm just going to move my rest here just so it's you can see here we're opening up distance between the wood and the rest. It's definitely an advantage to keep that to a minimum. Just again, I've moved the rest, so I'm spinning that by hand to make sure it doesn't hit the rest before I turn the lathe on. If you're unsure as to where the edge of the wood is, what you can do is drop the handle lower, find it with the bevel. So all I'm doing is running the heel of the bevel across the wood there. So I'm picking it up, and then when I know where it is, I'll lift the tool to bring the edge into play and then make the cut, knowing that I've just found where the edge is. So you can find the corner with the heel of the bevel, then lift the tool, take the cut. So if you're in any doubt, that's a good sort of principle to apply. Just give me a second, my visor's starting to mist up. I'm just going to demist and carry on. Right, that's it. So just carry on with that. I'm doing a pull cut here, but I'm trying to do it in a way that I'm virtually running on the bevel, so I leave a reasonably good finish here. You can do a pull cut in a more aggressive way, but here I don't want to tear the edge too much. Even with the way I'm doing it here, you can still see here there's the odd little bit that's tearing up rather than cutting cleanly. But part of the reason for that is because I'm cutting away from the bark edge rather than into it. So as I approach the final shape, what I can do is actually switch to a push cut from the outside. I'm kind of breaking the rules here a little because I'm cutting against the grain, but it's a compromise between do I cut with the grain and tear the edge, or do I cut against the grain with a gentle cut, so hopefully I can get a cleaner cut on the edge here. And we know those long fibres that are, tearing away like that, it's probably a good idea just to trim those back. Just doing that with a penknife. Do it at this stage. This side's not so bad, and then I can sort of continue on with the cut. So I'm going to come a little bit farther around with the rest. Again, spin that piece before I turn the lathe on. I'm just going to bring the speed up a little more. I'm sort of approaching 900 RPM there. Try and take as light a cut as I can on this edge. Down near the bottom, I'm obviously away from the bark edge now. I'm this central part of the cut. I've still got some edge there, but as I start to shape this, that will disappear. The edge is sort of improving, but there's still the odd little bit. It may be that, depending on the wood, you won't get it perfect, but let's persevere. What I can also do is, I mean, some woods respond better to sort of cutting one way than the other, and cutting against the grain and trying to clean the edge is sort of having some of the right effect. But if I drop the handle right down low and do a more of a shear cut here, then that may improve the cut on the edge. So sometimes it's worth experimenting with the piece of wood you're using to see which of those cuts it responds to best. So I've just worked on this bottom section here, and that's actually given me a fairly clean cut just by doing more of a shearing cut. And also you can see right on the edge of this corner where it was flat, that flat's now disappeared this side. There's a tiny little bit left on this side. So I still need a little bit more wood taken away. But that shearing cut does seem to be the best way to go with that. So I'm actually still going to be cutting with the grain. So I'll proceed with that and cut up to the edge with it. So handle low, fingers behind the rest still, and just try and get a low angle cut. And as gentle a cut as I can, really. It's not an easy cut to do when you've got an interrupted edge like that, because you're trying to make a cut with the bevel supported, but in a way it's not for 90% of that cut. So it's bit of trial and error to get the right position for the cut, and when you've got that, persevere with it. I'll try just doing the end, going back to the push cut again. Let's see how we're looking on the end. Well, that end's good, and that end's good. Yeah, there's a little bit of roughness on that edge, but I think what we've got there, I'll be able to get rid of at the sanding stage. So we'll treat that as the outer bit of the OG, the reverse curve, and then I'll start to shape the curve the other way on the center section. So coming in a bit and working into this bit. I also need to make myself a chuck spigot in the center, so we can address that at the same time. So I'm going to bring my rest back round to the bottom section, back here. Now the set of jaws I'm using are here on the chuck. It's 1.5 inches. I've set my dividers to the diameter of that. The internal gripping sort of dovetail on that, with the jaws open by about 4 or 5 millimeters. So it's forming a perfect circle at that point. That's the important thing, is you try and make your chuck spigot the size of the natural diameter of those jaws, if you see what I mean. So you've got as good a perfect circle as you can get. So when you attach the little piece of wood to the chuck, you get maximum contact between the two. So I'm just going to use my dividers to mark that center where the spigot will be. Before I do, actually, I'll just flatten it. I don't think it's far off, but just in case. Because these jaws are very shallow. The full depth of the jaw is just under 5 millimeters. So my spigot will be at best 4 to 4.5 millimeters deep. So there's little margin for error. So starting off with a properly flat spigot certainly helps. So there's my spigot marked. So I'll remove a bit of wood. And as I said, maximum depth about 4.5 millimeters. So I'll take away enough wood to create that spigot in the center. With most sets of chuck jaws, I just guess the length of the spigot, because there's usually more to play with. With these, I tend to measure it, because 3 millimeters and 4 millimeters, it doesn't sound a lot of difference, but it can be significant. Just have to watch my visor bouncing on that camera. Right, so where are we? I think that's at about 3. So I want another millimeter depth on that. If you've got one, depth gauge is quite useful for checking your spigot depth. I use one for box making, so this is what I've got. And you loosen the screw and you slide that in and out, and it's millimeters one side, inches the other. So you've got.
I love that. I have the same one, Paul, and I love it.
Yeah, I do too. I just turned around and looked to make sure you didn't take mine.
Yeah,
handy little tool.
Yeah,
they're an inexpensive little tool, but has a multitude of uses. So I can put that across my base here and check the spigot depth. I mean, I'm setting this to 4.5 millimeters. That's the plan.
and that looks just like
That should be perfect for my set of jaws. And I'm actually gone slightly too deep there, so I need to take just a little bit off. Got carried away and took too much wood off. So I remove about 1 millimeter. Just check it again. I mean, rather than me just relying on the measurements and my guesswork, I could have actually used the chuck, put this up to the chuck, and that is the depth there is pretty much spot on the depth of those jaws, which is 4.5 millimeters. So let me just do it this way. So I set my depth gauge to the jaw depth, which is there. Yeah, it's 4 and a bit, and that's just under the jaw size. So we'll check the spigot against that. And we're hitting the bottom before we bottom out. So that's just about right. I'm within probably a 0.5 millimeter of where I want to be. I've created a straight spigot there, so I want to dovetail. So if I just cut down the edge there with the gouge, with the bevel pointing straight along the bed, obviously I'm going to create a parallel sided spigot, but if I just bring my gouge farther round, my bevel's now pointing inwards. So if I come in on the edge just 1 millimeter or so down, then I can create a dovetail. And I know from experience that with that particular set of jaws, that angle's a pretty good match. So that's the spigot done. It's a case of removing this step that I've created here to form the bottom of the bowl now. So we can turn some of this surplus away. With many bowls, I'll create the spigot as the first thing I do. With this one, I didn't, but yeah, I could have done. So we'll start shaping the bottom half of the OG. I'm thinking ahead here, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with that spigot? Am I going to actually remove it completely, or will that become the foot when I finish this bowl? So, and I think given the size of the bowl and the size of that spigot, that's probably not a bad size for something like this. So I'll probably just reshape that, and that will become the foot. Obviously I've got a center mark in it, so I need to deal with that when I do it. So I'll turn some of the center away, or at least remove some of it in some way. But yeah, that could become my foot. So it's worth sort of thinking ahead and how are you going to finish the bottom of the bowl? Where's the foot going to be? How big's the foot going to be? And don't sort of fall into the trap that because you've got a certain size set of jaws on your chuck, that's how big your foot's got to be. Don't be sort of led down the garden path by the chuck. You're designing the bowl, and it's up to you how big you make the foot. Don't do it just because your spigot, your chucks. Let's say you've got a set of 2-inch jaws. That doesn't mean your foot's got to be 2 inches. You can make it any size you want. Obviously, that's at the turning stage for the bowl. You need a 2-inch spigot to make with that set of jaws. But once you return the base to turn that spigot away, you can make that any size you want. So now I've turned some of this base away, and I'm starting to put the curve into it. I'm going to change sort of the dynamics of where the top half of the OG is as well. So I'm going to take more wood away up there as well. And again, trying to keep that handle low. So I'm doing a more of a shearing cut when I'm approaching the edge of the wing. Try and get a better cut. See if that works better than the push cut. So, yeah, you see I'm getting a bit of fuzzy edge there with that cut, but it's sort of trading that off against how much tail you get if you cut backwards against the grain. And in this case, it's a sort of swings and roundabouts on that one, really. So bottom half of the curve coming sort of into a better shape now. a little bit more to do on the wings. One thing I do like about the push cut is it enables you to cut backwards and forwards as I'm doing here. So it has its advantages. See how it's going. That's giving me a slightly better edge. There's still a little bit of fuzz, but it's actually reducing, and I'm getting a cleanish cut on the actual the outer curve part of the OG. So
Yeah, it looks good,
a bit
Paul.
of sorry.
It looks good.
Okay,
What kind of wood is that?
it's Masso birch.
Masso birch. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it comes from Finland and sort of the Baltic region. It's a really nice wood. I've used it for many years, and I colour it as well. As a lot of people sort of hold their hands up in horror about colouring such a highly figured piece of wood, but that's why I use it, for the colour.
Yeah, it's got some great speckle in it.
It gives you sort of the varying rates of absorption because of the figure in it, and that's what I like about it. Right, so I'm just going to try and refine this curve. But what I'm looking at when I'm doing this cut is the edge profile to see what curve I've got and how that's sort of panning out across the whole profile of the wing, if you want to call it that. So rather than sort of looking down here at where I'm cutting, I'm looking up over here at the far side to see what the curve's doing against the background, so I can see where I need to add or remove wood when I'm actually doing the cutting here. So yeah, shape's sort of coming together. It's a bit of a sort of step in the middle, not a step exactly, but the curve isn't as smooth as I want, so I've got a little bit more to refine in the middle. I'm just going to do a slight sort of cut just away from the spigot, so I'm leaving a flat around the spigot for the jaws to sit against, and then cut upwards slightly from that point, just so that when I reshape the bowl I've got a little bit more to work with when I reshape the spigot. I mean, when I'm forming the foot of the bowl, and that'll be the sort of the final stage on this. I'm trying to keep that handle low.
Yeah.
This rest here, I've got one of the robust rest here. It's great for keeping the edge flat, but it's actually quite a wide rest in sort of this dimension, and it's limiting how low I can get my gauge handle. So I'm going to switch to one of the one-way rests, the short one, which is a little narrower, just so I can get a little bit lower with the gauge handle. So we'll see how I get on with that. As what I'm trying to achieve here is as much of a shearing, slice and cut as possible, to give me the best edge I can get. On most of this edge, that's working reasonably well, but right on the very tip, that's where it gets a little bit inconsistent. So I'm finding the edge with the bevel, then coming back with the tool and just taking a light cut.
For a final cut, it's a good idea for a fresh edge.
Yeah. So that's not too bad. There's just the odd little bit of fuzz,
Yeah.
which I think I
Pretty
can
wood.
get away with sanding away. I'm happier with the shape now. The odd little ridge there, but those can be sanded out, I think. So that's sort of the bottom edge, and I can see here the edge profile is a nice curve. So I'm happy with that. It's quite a shallow OG, I would say, but there's nothing wrong with that. They don't have to be terribly deep, and given the thickness of this, there's a limit to just how much curve you want to put in this, and put too much curve in there and you end up sort of with too flat an edge. So it's a bit of a compromise on working with what you got. So I'm moving the rest out of the way. I could sand this side now. I'm not going to actually. I'll sand it when we reverse it to do the to reshape the foot, etc. So that's the outside turned as far as I'm going to turn it. Take that off the lathe there. Get rid of my drive center, and then I can mount my chuck. Whenever you put your chuck on the lathe, clean that back face. Make sure you've got a clean face on the end of the spindle there, so you get any shavings caught between those two, and then it's going to just throw the chuck out slightly. Stick that on. I'm just going to take my knife center out so I don't end up piercing my elbow with it. And on this being a short bed lathe, I'm just going to take the tailstock off so I've got more room to get access. So let's bring the
Easier on the back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So put my piece of wood in there, and I'm just pushing the center of the blank so it's seating as evenly as possible on the jaws. Tighten that up, and that seems to be running fairly true. So good to go there. This rest is a little bit short. It's not far off actually, but I'll go back to the slightly longer rest, the 9-inch one. I think that was a 6-inch. Back to this one. Again, I'm going to set my rest up so I'm running across the surface of that and below center, so when I put my bowl gouge on here, I'm cutting at center height. That's a bit below. I'm just debating whether to.
May I ask you to?
Of course.
Paul, may I ask you to adjust your second camera, lower it a little bit? Your insert.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Your insert. Lower the camera for the insert.
Lower this one. Yep. Okay.
Yes, sir.
That better?
There you go. There you go.
Good. Okay.
Yes,
Brilliant.
yes, sir.
Well, I'm gonna use
these entry cuts.
Yeah. I'm going to use a bigger gouge here. I got a 1/2-inch bowl gouge rather than the 3/8 I picked up first, just because I'm working on an uneven edge, and if I'm going to get any bounce on it, I want a fairly sort of rigid tool. So it probably seems like overkill, and it probably is, but I'm just making sure I don't get any bounce on the tool. Right then, so spin that by hand, start it up, and away we go. So same as any other bowl, start in the middle, start turning that away. But remember, we're working on this natural edge, so when we come in on the edge, it's an interrupted edge, it's not a continuous edge. So take care with the cut there. And this is a fairly shallow piece of wood, so I'm not going too deep initially. It's got quite a distinctive smell, this wood. I'm not sure I can describe it, but it smells like no other wood I've turned. So it's not an unpleasant smell, but it is quite sort of distinctive.
Quite aromatic.
But for those of you who've never come across it before, as I said earlier, it grows in Finland, and all these markings in the wood are from beetles. They bore in through the bark, effectively make holes in the wood, and then I'm assuming it's like most woodworm. They would lay eggs in the wood. The larvae develop and eat their way out. But then the wood grows over it, and it sort of heals itself and grows over it. So you end up with all these markings in, and it's a radiating pattern out of the center of the log, and it's quite unusual and quite interesting.
Yeah.
So you can see from the top view, we are following the curve pretty much. So that's not a bad sort of guesswork as to where I've been cutting. And again, as I showed you earlier, I can always find the corner with the heel of the bevel and then bring the handle forward and pick up the cut. So I use the heel of the bevel to find the corner that I can't see, and then take the gauge forward to pick it up. Take the handle forward. What I mean by bring the handle forward, if you consider the gouge on the wood there like that, if I take the handle around like that, I'm lifting the bevel off, aren't I? I'm bringing the heel of the bevel in, and it will lift the edge off. So then if I'm running the bevel on the wood, I'm not cutting. But when I find the corner, I bring the handle forward, so I bring the edge back in, and then it's going to contact the wood, and then I'm going to take a cut. So that's what I mean by sort of bringing the handle forward, taking it back. So you find the corner on the heel of the bevel without taking a cut, but when you found it, bring the handle forward and you take your cut, and away you go. Hope that makes sense. Right, so we've got still a good ½ inch thickness there, so I want to thin that down some more. And again, my visor's fogging up, so just give me a second. I think it's because my workshop's cold. I ought to have put the heating on earlier. It doesn't usually do that out here. Okay. I'm going to bring the speed up just a little more as well. I'm doing about 950 now. So, try and find that edge. Again, use the heel of the bevel, bring the tool forward, and take my cut in. The reason I increase the speed is to reduce the bounce on the edge. I don't want to go sort of crazy fast, but I do want a little bit more speed just to make this more consistent. But you see there, I'm starting to thin down, and I'm trying to keep it consistent on this outer edge. I've left the center. I'm just going to do the outer section of the wing and then thin it down. This is quite an interesting outside on the bark, so there is some merit in actually leaving some of that visible. So you could actually leave this thicker and chunkier than you might with an ordinary wood, just to show off that unusual dark edge. But I don't want to go excessively thick with it, so I'm paring it down. I'm probably down to just under 1/4 inch now, about 5 millimeters maybe. A little bit more maybe. I mean, the one I showed you earlier, I think that was, let me just pick it up and have a look. Yeah, that's about 2 and a bit millimeters thick, so we can go a bit thinner. I'm not sure I want to go 2.5 millimeters with this one, but a little bit more than I have. So again, find the corner, handle forward, take another cut. And then we'll just check that again. So that's looking okay. The sort of smoothness of the cut isn't bad. Cutting fairly clean on this side. I'll take another cut. And then maybe that's the last one. I don't know, we'll see. So that was a much thinner cut. Thinking ahead, if that's a finishing cut, I don't want to take a big cut. I'm now sort of almost taking finishing cuts. So that feels smooth, it feels flat, no bumps and ridges, so I'm happy with that. And thickness wise, we're down to probably 3 millimeters at the extreme of the wing. It thickens out slightly as it comes in, so I think I will take one more cut, but without taking any more off the extreme of the wing. I'll just come in just off the edge and just try and even that out a little. Again, taking a very thin cut. So that's evened it up better. I think it still needs a little bit more. So I'm just going to reduce that circle I've created inwards slightly. Better, so I can come in on the wing. Get down a little bit farther this time. And the reason for that, I'm approaching the bottom section here to see where I'm going on the thickness, and yeah, that's still thickening up slightly, so a little bit more off the wing. So thickness wise, that's now much more even from there to there. So I'm happy with that wing, and now it's the center section. I've just got to remind myself to keep my wrist and my hand the right side of the rest here, so I don't foul that wing as I move my hand across the rest. I'm just going to take a quick look there. I know I've got certainly a couple more millimeters to go. Thickness wise in the middle, that's about right. I'll just need to work this center section. And then out
Paul,
to
you're making it like I'm there doing the turning. It's awesome. You're doing an awesome job.
Okay. So you can see here I've still got a ridge. I've got another cut, at least one more cut to thin that down to the same thickness as the rest of it. So on that last cut, what I aim for is not to just pick up the ridge, is to fill the cut in just before the ridge. If you aim to pick up the ridge, then quite often you'll take sort of 2/3 of it away or 3/4 away or whatever, but you leave the ridge there because you hit start the cut on the ridge, cut in, and you've left a bit of it behind. But what I aim to do is come just back outside it, you feather the cut in, and what I mean by that is in if you imagine you're cutting around this curve, and now you're cutting sort of following that curve, but you angle the tool in slightly. So instead of just following it, you actually cut into it, but you want to hit the curve at a very shallow angle. So you don't leave a ridge when you start the cut, basically. So you start off with a cut of 0, and as you move the tool forward, it gets slightly thicker. And that way you feather the cut in, and you don't leave an edge. You don't leave another ridge. But you see on this edge here, it's thickening slightly in the middle from about here where that circle was that I've just cut away. So back to that point and take another cut just to try and even that out. Just get rid of that fuzz. Yeah, one more. It's still slightly thicker in the middle than it is on the wings. And again, with each of these cuts I'm taking, I'm trying to feather it in so I don't leave a ridge. And that last cut wasn't quite right, so I'm going to take one more. Okay, let's see where we are. That's not too bad. There's a little bit of a ridge out here, but I think I'll get to the point where this is starting to flex. So it's a case of, do I take another cut? Thickness wise, I'm sort of almost there. What I'm going to do is just sharpen this gouge on my grinder. And then do that last cut with my lamp forward slightly so I get a better view. I'll pick that up. And one more. So it's where that ridge was out here, the little bit of unevenness I'm trying to smooth out, but each cut is actually probably just making it as bad as the cut I'm taking away. So I think because it's now starting to flex, there's less strength in here. So it's the movement of the wood that's causing that. It's actually distorting as I'm taking the cut. So from that point, I think it's discretion is the better part of valor. So from there, sand it. Otherwise, I'll end up with no wood and nothing left. So I'm going to sand this initially by hand. I've got I'll say by hand. I'm going to do it with power assistance, but and the reason for that, if I sand this with the lathe running, I'm going to round off the edges of the wing. So the centre part you can do with the lathe running, but certainly these wings, it's best to sand them with the lathe stationary. And you notice here I've got this is rotating clockwise from the direction I'm looking at. From this end it's running clockwise. So as that's running across the edge there, it's running away from the edge, so it's not going to kick and pull. If I've got this on that edge running in that direction, it'll kick on the edge and it'll potentially pull this where I don't want it. So when I'm on this edge, what I would do then is run the tool backwards, so I'm running away from that edge. So I've got a reversible drill, and I'll make sure that wherever I'm sort of sanding on an edge, I'm turning the sanding arbor away from it rather than into it for that reason. Let me just back this camera up slightly, so hopefully I can give you a slightly better view of the sanding process, and we'll switch to that as the main view. Okay.
That's a good shot.
So I've started off with a 120 grit here, just to take out any bumps and ridges, basically.
Boy, is that ever pretty.
And I can see this flexing as I'm on the corners here. I can see how that flexes as I just bring the sander onto the surface. So it was getting to the point where going any thinner was going to be quite problematic. But I think that's a good sort of thickness for this. It's about 3 millimeters, I would say. That feels better. There's a little bit there I need to get rid of. So the first grit, as with anything you turn, the first grit, the job it's got to do is to take out any tool marks, any bumps and ridges, any torn grain, any other blemishes you don't want people to see, basically. So all those things you don't want in the final finished piece, that's what you're trying to get rid of with that first grit. So don't go to a finer grit until you've achieved that. And if the grit you started with doesn't do it, go coarser. There's no point going to a finer grit until you've addressed all those bumps, ridges, torn grain, tool marks, whatever you've got to deal with. So, and I think that's where a lot of people can sort of let themselves down, perhaps unintentionally, but you leave the odd tool mark or the odd bit of torn grain or whatever. And as you sand down through the finer grits, the finer you sand, the more obvious they become. Just the nature of the wood, because as you sand it finer, the wood tends to darken slightly, but anywhere you've got torn grain or bruised grain, it gets lighter. So you end up with this difference in tone between the good bits and the bad bits become more and more obvious. So it pays to sand it all out with that first grit and be done with it. I'm just going to reverse that because I'm coming up this edge now. I've locked the spindle this time just to make it slightly easier so it's not moving when I'm trying to sand here. I'm just checking that to feel that it's smooth. And I've got that shallow OG on the end, I can feel it. There's a little, I think up here I've got a little sort of a bug trail or something, a bit of it, and there's one there, but I think with this wood it's part of the character of it really. You get those occasionally, but it's an old one, there's no live rodents in there, whatever you want to call them. So we can go down through the grits now. I'll go to 180 next. This arbor, it's quite a stiff arbor, but I've got a foam backer on it to give me a bit of a softer pad. So I can use it without the pad to get a softer surface, or with it, with the pad to get a softer surface, or without it to give me a harder surface if I want to create a flatter edge. So it depends what I'm trying to sand as to whether I use it with the pads or without. Not the most exciting things to watch, I know, but unnecessary evil. So you can, if it's sort of less extreme on the wings here, sand it perhaps with the lathe running, but obviously if you're getting your fingers close to this, you've got to be very careful not to catch your fingers on the edge.
Yeah.
As
Now-
it spins past,
Mark-
so
Going.
always want to be wary of. But yeah, with a shape like this, it's very difficult to do it with the lathe running. So it's easier just to go over it with the lathe stationary, I would say. That's feeling about right. So we'll go down to 240. Sometimes with these I'll do the outer bits with a drill like this or with a pad, and then sand it by hand, just with a piece of abrasive in between my fingers, and sand it that way. But this one, it's a moderately shallow curve, and it's sort of working well with sanding the whole thing with the sander on the drill here. So I'll continue with that over the whole thing. So down to 320. I'll probably sand this to 400. I mean, I've got abrasives that go much finer, but I mean, generally on a light coloured wood like this, I'd probably stop at about 320, maybe 400. But as this has got some nice figure in it, and sometimes you do actually get the chatoyance in the wood, as they call it, as well, it pays to sand it fine and put a moderately shiny finish on it to capitalise on that chatoyance in the wood if it's there, which I think it will be, at least in parts.
It's a pretty piece. It is a pretty piece
So
of wood.
along with those sort of the black marks you see, which are the sort of the remnants of where the beetles have been in the wood does show just sections of figure as well, just like sort of ripple figuring and the like. And I can see that starting to appear as I'm sanding it finer. So to try and bring out that figure more, I will go a little bit finer. I'll go as far as 400 on this. What I was saying earlier about the coloured pieces that I make with this, I've not made any for quite a while actually, but I've got some really nice logs to make use of, and hopefully in the not too distant future I'll start looking at those and cutting them up. But I'll show you one of them in a minute, so you can see that radial pattern. This piece was cut sort of laterally out of a log, but if I show you the end of a log, you'll see what I mean about the way that pattern develops in the log as the log grows. So I'll fish one out for you when I've finished this. So that's the outside sanded to 400. These couple of little sort of beetle trails or whatever you want to call them, I'm not going to do anything with them. I'll just leave them as they are. In fact, all I'm going to do is go over that with a brush, so if there's anything loose in there, we get rid of it. That sanding process has thinned this down a little, so probably a good job I stopped where I did. So finish wise, I'm going to use a sanding sealer and a wax finish on it. Just trying to fish out the appropriate kind of cellulose sealer.
You know, in that piece, you could play find the picture all day. I see a bee.
Give a second.
Yeah, Brenda, you'd have fun with
That's
that.
Oh, there it is.
That'll keep you busy, Brenda.
It would all day long. Be a
Hey,
frown.
Brenda, did you see that tree I sent you on Facebook?
Right, turn the blower off so I can hear what you're saying. Was that a question?
No, we're just talking about how beautiful the
Okay.
wood is and the various animals Brenda could find in there.
Yeah, it's surprising what you find in wood sometimes. I've turned pieces of
I
wood and
see
found some,
several dogs.
yeah.
Do you see the whale?
Quite big.
The big sperm
Well,
whale,
you know-
Moby Dick, Brenda?
No,
I see the octopus. Do you see the octopus?
Yeah, octopus.
I do
There's
see a
even
dolphin.
there's a pterodactyl too. There's two of them.
you, Eddie.
You people
Right, so
are
this-
crazy.
Octopus, he's joined the club.
And I can't wait to see some oil finish on there.
Oh,
Yeah, what I'm using is a
Thank you,
cellulose
Julie.
sanding sealer, which is an aerosol, just for speed, really. So again, I'm going to spray that on with the lay stationary.
And that's funny because all I see is a bunch of squiggly lines.
Good coat
We
of
haven't
that.
been in this club long enough to be able
Yeah.
to see anything.
Oh, they're
You gotta look.
beautiful.
There's a big moose there's a moose in there.
It looks like fur.
If all you see is squiggly lines, you would never pass the I'm crazy test. You must be.
I'll give that a minute to dry. It's fairly fast drying, being cellulose. So I'll just give that a minute. Yeah, what I normally do is 2 or 3 light coats of that, and if you put a light coat on and then another light coat, it dries fast. If you put one heavy coat on, it tends to take an awful lot longer to dry.
Now, is
Give that
all
just a
the
little-
bark off of it, or is it still on there?
There's no bark on it at all. What you're seeing is the edge of the wood that's beneath the bark. That they
It's
tend not to
gorgeous.
ship the wood with the bark on. There's the odd tiny, like here, there's the odd tiny little remnant of bark, which I can usually break off. But it's one of those woods. They always take the bark off in case there's any live bugs still in it. So I think they don't ship it out of the country with bark on it.
It's
For
gorgeous.
that reason, it always arrives minus the bark. I've never seen a piece of it with the bark on, but the edge of the wood is quite unique anyway. I think with
Beautiful.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, like if you look at the burrs under the bark,
It's
you've got all
beautiful.
those little knobbles and bits. But this is quite a unusual wood with the
That's
bark off it.
spectacular.
So I'm just cutting that back with some 4/0 steel wool, just to give me a nice smooth surface.
Somebody
Like
sent
this.
that to you or did you buy it?
You
Pardon?
know, all Americans are salivating over here over your wood.
Oh, right, Sue? Right?
That's
Yes.
exactly right.
So there was a question. So that's Maser birch, and it grows.
Yeah,
in
MASUR. Yeah, it comes from Finland, or I think you can get it in some areas of Russia and sort of the Scandinavian countries.
I
But
mean-
Finland, I think, is the usual place. But it's also known as Karelian birch, and I think that's one of the regions in
Did you
Finland
have
or
to buy
something
it
like that.
or?
Yeah, because it doesn't grow in England. Yeah, you had to buy it.
No, definitely not. No,
Oh.
you buy it from one of the importers, basically. Yeah, it doesn't grow
Oh.
here.
It's got a figure in it besides the bug in figure in it is absolutely gorgeous.
Isn't it though?
Ah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
A
Yeah, I
ripple
mean that's
along
what,
the
that's what
edge.
makes it. Yeah, definitely. Without the efforts of the bugs, it would just be a plain piece of birch.
Right.
It's
I think
gorgeous.
the actual species of birch is probably the same as we do get grown in the UK, but you don't get the same bugs.
Is it
I remember
expensive?
looking it up. It is. It's very expensive. Yeah. Costs an arm and a leg. Yeah. So I took the logs I've got stashed away. Almost had to take out a second mortgage for. But
And folks,
yeah, it was-
Paul used this as expensive wood for a demonstration for our group.
absolutely, yeah. Don't cut any corners here. Right, I'm just going to run the lathe on that, and I'm just
At
going to
one
be very
point,
careful to keep my fingers back, so I can run the pad across the surface without putting too much pressure on it. Because if you put pressure on it, you're obviously overshooting the edge. So just lightly buff that. So that's the top face done.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. At one point, we had 98 viewers watching this.
Yep. But you
Yeah.
see that?
Isn't
Yeah,
that
that's
beautiful?
beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's nice
That
stuff.
is spectacular.
But I mean, between these sort of the black lines, there is some figuring there. I don't know
Oh,
how well the
picture
camera's
is
sort of
beautiful.
transmitting that, but
Look
Yeah,
at
we,
the,
we can see.
you've got a
we
little
can
bit of
see-
fiddle figure
running
in
a bit
there.
of wood.
Gorgeous.
It's
Yeah,
fiddle.
we can see the
it looks
chatoyance in the
3D.
quilting.
Very nice.
It looks 3D. That's just, I've never seen that wood before.
Yeah,
That's
it almost
just-
does. Yeah, you're right.
I
Right, so I'm going
bet,
to
Kate,
switch
I
trucks.
bet, Kate,
Paul,
I
it was
bet
a
you've got
great
some of that.
demonstration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate,
Yeah.
Kate,
Yeah,
I
I
bet
got
you
a
got
little
some of
piece
that
too.
sitting out in your
I
back
do a lot
40.
of those bowls as well. They're fun. They're a good adrenaline rush.
Yep, yeah.
Have you
angel
got time for me
wings.
to finish off the bottom?
That's
Yes.
what I call them. I call them angel wings. Yeah, go ahead, do
Okay.
the bottom.
Yeah.
Right, carry on.
Show how you're going to put that foot on
Shouldn't
there.
take too much longer. I've got to reshape that foot and sort out the sand in the back, obviously. So my spigot here, as I said earlier, I'm going to try and reshape that to become the foot of the bowl. I mean, this is about in the middle, 3 millimeters thick or so, and I've got another probably 4 there. So total of maybe 7 millimeters there to be playing with. So to mount that on the lathe, what I generally do is to use a wooden mandrel. So I've got here, this was the base of something else I parted off, a hollow form or something like that. And I've kept lots of these. And all I do is put a nice gentle curve on the front face. And then I'm looking for one that's a reasonable match for the surface of whatever curve I'm working on. That's probably not too bad. I've got another one up here I'm just going to check, which is somewhat flatter. So this one, as you can see, is a bit flatter, and that's actually got multiple sort of chuck points on the back, so I can actually use that on 2 or 3 different sizes of chuck. Actually, that's a pretty good, yeah, that's a pretty good fit. So I'll go with this one. But yeah, I've got a few different curves, sort of flatter and sharper curves for different shapes of bowls and things like that I reverse in that way. So put my tail center back in. So I want my 4-prong drive here back in the chuck. I mean, for the purposes of this, I want to try and get closer into the center. So for this one, I might, because I'm trying to keep some of that foot, I might just switch to a normal conical drive like this one. So I'll put that one in the tailstock. I don't need a lot of pressure here. I'm not doing any heavy cuts. I'm not doing anything drastic with it. So I can use just the conical point here. So anyway, between that and my bowl, I want a bit of protection because I've just polished this surface. So what I've got here is a piece of non-stick router mat and just an ordinary bit of kitchen towel. So I'll put that together to make a sandwich. Put the router mat against the mandrel, the kitchen towel against the bowl. So that will protect my surface. And then bring my tailstock in.
You're using the cone will help you center it, right?
Yes, but I could have used a ring center to center it. So that's how I'm going to hold that, and I can now turn the back of this. That needs just a little bit more pressure there. Now that might be a little bit too flat actually, but no, that's okay. That's giving me enough drive. Right, so I'm just mounting my rest here. If I switch to the overhead view, give you a better idea of what I'm doing. So I'll just set my rest up here so I can get in, turn this. That's located and mounted securely, and there's enough friction between those two now to give me the drive I need. So if we go to, there's that one. I'll move that camera slightly. Let's get this so it's not being obstructed by the lock on the tailstock, that's all. That's a bit better. Okay, so that's Let's get a better view there. Right, so I'm going to switch to a smaller spindle gauge. I've got a 3/8 here now to try and finish this foot. So I want to thin the foot down ever so slightly. So I'll just take a little bit off the surface again at this stage, just using a pull cut. I could actually flip that over and do a push cut if I wanted. Either's good. And then cut in towards the center. I'll leave a little bit there for the moment, but I can take a little bit more of that away. This has got a little bit of a wobble on it, so I'm just going to stop and see how I'm mounted. I think that spun slightly on my mandrel, so I'll just try and realign that to even it up. Slightly better, but because this is fairly thin, I need to have this running fairly true. So I'm just going to have another go at some adjustment there. I may be better off switching to my other mandrel. This has got a little bit of too much of a flat, so the curve in the middle against the flat is just trying to flatten out the bowl a bit, if you see what I mean. So although it's good on the outside, it's not giving me the support where I need it in the middle. So I think I'm actually going to back that out and switch to that other piece of wood, which has just got a slightly more of a curve on it. It's not a big difference, but it's sort of a subtle difference that I think is putting the support where I need it. So I'm just being a little bit cautious with that. Right, so center back in. And immediately that feels more secure with less pressure. Okay, let's hold that there. Got a spin, that's good. You can see I've got a little bit of a knot there as well, so just got to be a little bit careful where that knot is. Right, so the edge of what was my chuck spigot, I want to take that dovetail away. I don't want a dovetail on it because then it just looks like a chuck spigot. I'm putting a curve in the opposite direction on it. So just a little bit of almost a cove on the corner of it. And then smooth out the base of the bowl. I can actually, now this is running true, I can actually turn my gauge over and do a push cut into that base. And then the base of the foot here, I'll flatten that off. I'll just trim it flat again because having relocated this on a different mandrel, it's not running on quite on the same plane. And then I'll trim out the center here to remove that center mark. So I'm thinning that out to pretty much the depth of the foot plus a millimeter probably. So yeah, I've taken about 4 to 5 millimeters back, but any more than that, and I run the risk of going through. I'm about right, I think, where I am, or at least I'm hoping I'm about right. But yeah, that little bit in the middle, I'll leave it where it is for now. I want a little bit of wood there to support as I sand, although I'm sanding it again with the lathe off. So in theory, I don't need too much pressure there. Anyway, right, so we'll go back to 180. I think I should be good to go with a 180 on this rather than a 240. But as I said earlier, whatever grit you start with, that's got to do all the legwork. If I can't get it all with 180, I'm going to have to go back to 120. But let's see where we go. Right, might reverse that camera slightly now. I'll back it up a bit so you've got a slightly better view of the sanding process. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, so I mean, there's probably bits to this I can't quite get into with the sanding arbor on here, but around the edge of here, I can run the lathe and sand the center sort of inch and a bit there between my two fingers. I can sand that with the lathe running, so I don't need to worry about getting right into that center. What I want to do is to do the wings with the drill. So I'll put my dust extractor back on, and then we'll have a go at this. Here I'm running off the other side, so I'm going to turn my drill into reverse. So I'm running this off that edge rather than onto it, as I explained earlier. So the drill doesn't try and skate off the edge. It's much more controllable if you do it that way. This is, I mean, for those of you that have turned any sort of birch, this is very similar. It's quite a soft wood. It cuts fairly easily and it sands fairly easy. So you don't need a lot of pressure. Yeah, it's a nice wood to work. But yeah, as it was mentioned earlier, very expensive. So we're trying not to make too many rejects, but it happens. I remember once I was making a hollow form and I went through the side of it, so I ended up with a small master birch bowl rather than a hollow form, but I rescued something out of it, so that I wasn't too disappointed. But if you don't try with these woods, you don't learn, do you? So it's a case of practice.
Yeah.
And as I always say to people, if you don't go through the side occasionally, you just aren't trying hard enough.
Right.
I'm just trying to sand out the wings with this. There's a little bit more just here. There's evidence of either a little bit of bruising or a little bit of tearing. I'm not quite sure which, but I'll just give it a little bit more of a sand. That's much better. See, that didn't take an awful lot extra, but in the finished piece, that will pay dividends. It'll look better. Right, so that's that end done. Now if I flip this around the other way, do the same again.
Notice those wings flexing?
Oh, yeah. Which would do the best move.
Sure looks like it.
That may not have caught it earlier when he
Well, as I'm sanding this wing down, I'm losing the fuzzy bits off the edge.
You noticed earlier when he was doing the flip side or the inside of that piece, he left some beef in the middle as he was hollowing or thinning it down, and he kept stepping down. And that's important. If you try to make it all in one pass, you get to pick the pieces up later.
That's right. Just like a big bowl, you want to leave that center mass in there to keep the wings or the walls from flexing.
So again, just look for anywhere that you think there might be any bruised grain, torn grain, anything like that. Make sure you sand that away.
Actually, the thinner you get, the
Right,
worse
so I
it
think
will
that's
be.
good on the wing. So take off the spindle lock, and the center part I'll sand with the lathe running, also at 180 grit. So I'm working on a solid section and out as far as I can feel that I'm just coming off it. So I can do close to 2 inches. And then the center part, I'll get in there and sand as much as I can. I might have to do a bit of hand finishing on that center part when it comes off the lathe, but I'll sand what I can now, and we'll see where it goes.
Members, you're watching a 2-camera free demonstration.
But just remember, because of that uneven edge like that there, if I run off too far, keep your fingers in the direction of rotation. So if you do catch the edge, it pushes your fingers away rather than bending them back. So hurts an awful lot less. So that's looking good from the 180. So I can move on to 240. So I'll do the 240 on the drill again. And if that first grit has done all the work it should have done, all I need to do now is to take away the sanding marks left by the 180 grit. That's all this is doing. So it doesn't take too long, and it doesn't take too much work. And then when I put the 320 grit on, all that does is take away the marks left by the 240. Those little fuzzy bits on the edge will disappear as I sand.
This is one of the few times when sanding is actually interesting.
I think there's a little mark there that I should have got out with the 180, but I didn't, but I've just managed to crack it with the 240, so that's good.
And you're right on money, because some novice turners are young.
So that's the outside done with 240.
Yeah. They don't
Sand the center in the same way.
Go ahead, Eddie.
So
They don't understand the importance
240 grit in the center
without tool marks.
with a flat abrasive.
Notice he's stepping up. His piece was
Just be careful not to
very well cut.
overshoot that edge. So they're nice and easy on the edge.
And these pieces can be prone to having tool marks on them because you can't really see
And
them.
then
until you
320 on
finish
the drill sander.
Matt, isn't that where a sealer comes in to help you see it?
Yeah.
This
Yes,
was
yes.
fantastic.
What was
Yeah,
that,
this-
Susan?
Yeah, the sealer will help you see it. You're right, Eddie.
That's why I believe in it. I really do believe in sealer on products, because then you see exactly what your finish is going to look like.
Oh my goodness, it looks beautiful.
Oh, it is. My wife would say it's a beautiful piece of wood, except for all those wriggly things.
Yeah,
That was pretty good, Eddie.
Hey, I just tell it the truth.
And
I
then
try.
320 by hand on the center as before.
Hey, Gary, I keep a drill on the lathe just like Paul does. I power sand on the lathe just like he does. It's a great way to get a great finish on surfaces like this.
Yep.
Cool.
And if you don't think you can afford one, angled drills are only $19 at Harbor Freight.
Yeah, I just bought a straight up quarter drill. It doesn't even have to be angled. You can get it in most places with a normal drill.
And then we've got the last one, 400 grit on the outside.
I've been to demos where they didn't allow sanding because it was a boring part of the demo. Pay attention,
hell.
folks. This is not boring. This is
No, not
showing
at all.
technique.
This is
Yeah,
phenomenal.
It is. It's great.
This is
Yeah,
technique.
if you don't power sand, it's hard to explain it to somebody. So it's great.
I do this on all my acrylic pens. It's a lot easier, and you get such a smooth surface.
We got a swirl rather than a deep cut.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you want to have a light touch with it. He's not pushing it really hard against the wood. He's light touching and keeping up the
Exactly.
circular motion.
And then 400 by hand in the center.
Letting the sandpaper work.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's absolutely wonderful.
You don't want to create a lot of friction because of
Correct.
heat.
No,
It's
you don't want
getting
to
hot,
burnish
you're,
wood.
you're pressing too hard.
If you burnish wood to make it smooth, it won't stay that way.
No,
Oh,
it'll,
look
it'll
how
straighten
beautiful
out
it is.
Because the
eventually.
fiber.
Okay, we've got the rest of it is
Contact's
done. I'm just gonna use my brush to brush any dust off there. Sanding
Oh,
sealer and
beautiful,
wax.
Paul. It's beautiful, Paul.
Gorgeous.
And that.
Is
Back
this
to
worth
off,
the
so it's a
admission
bit
fee or
quieter.
what?
Right, so we'll put
Some magic.
sanding sealer on here.
A little
I'll
bit
give
of
that
grain
30
sauce.
seconds to dry, and I'll put another coat on.
Oh,
Look at that color come to life.
I've still got
Gorgeous.
that center. Yeah, that's what I like about you. You just put the first coat of finish on, and it brings out all that color and figure in the wood.
it's
Yeah,
gorgeous. Now, how
That
do you
figure
get?
on the edge toward the top is phenomenal.
I'll give that a minute to dry. So once I've sanded all this, I'll deal with this little nib in the center. But that I think I can do after I take it off the lathe, so to speak. But I'll show you that in a sec. Very easy to
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Folks, this is
Okay.
a great demonstration from the United Kingdom.
So when you coming over to visit?
Hey, when
Oh, you
y'all
would say,
pass
Barbara?
through when y'all pass through Finland, pick me up a log.
I got a spare bedroom in
Right, that's dry
Florida.
now, so well, we'll cut it back.
Just throw a few
Yeah, there
logs
are
on the overhead
two,
and bring into the
holes in here from the creatures that used to live in it, but that's all part of the charm of the wood, I think. So
Paul, how are you going to do the nub in the center there?
I'll show you in a sec.
All right, I'll hold out and wait then.
Yep. So I just want to run the lathe and just get that center part. Just careful with this steel wool not to grab the edge with it. So I folded it well back on itself, as you can see there.
Yep.
So there's no, I mean, with all that loose stuff, if I was doing it like that, then it's a little bit iffy. So I folded it back on itself, so I've got a fairly firm pad there, and it's not going to get caught on that piece of wood as it spins. Right then, last bit, well, almost the last bit. Put some wax on this. I'm using a Renaissance wax. It's one of the microcrystalline waxes. It's a synthetic wax rather than a beeswax, and I use that because it doesn't show up finger marks. Basically, you can handle it all day and it doesn't show up any marks. Whereas the beeswax based polishes tend to dull and show finger marks if they're handled a lot. The Renaissance wax or any of the microcrystalline waxes are slightly higher melting point. So whereas beeswax, the melting point is close to your body or close enough to your body temperature to melt slightly if you handle it. I don't think it's entirely body temperature, but certainly makes a difference. Right, so I'll do a bit of buffing by hand on these wings, just to get the process going. And then I'll run the lathe again, fold the pad that I'm using so I can't, or I avoid the risk of catching those wings, and I can feel it running across the wings there, but just touching. That's hard. All you do is shred the pad. This is like a paper safety cloth, as they call it. Drop it there. Well, that should do it. Right, so that center bit, I could turn a little bit more of that away, but I don't think I'm going to need to. So I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. Take this off the lathe, and then we'll work on that. I'll show you how I do it. I might have used this in one of my previous demos, I can't remember now, but again, it's a little piece of wood which came off something else I parted off. I've got a sanding arbor just pressed into a good fit hole. If you want to take off a lot of wood, put a piece of 80 grit on there. If you don't want to take off quite so much, a bit of 120 grit. This is 120. That should do what I need. So that goes in the chuck. So, I mean, I could cut that off. I could try and carve it off, but I've got a fairly delicate piece. If I'm trying to carve that, I need to sort of avoid stabbing myself. So this way, and I'm just going to take out that live center, so there's no risk of me stabbing either my bowl or me. Put my sanding hood back in and turn that back on.
Good.
So I can run my lathe a little faster now, and I'll just sand this away. So let me switch the cameras around, that's probably slightly better. So you can see here I'm putting my arbor up against the centre there. I've got both hands on a piece of work, I'm stable. I've got my elbow resting on the tailstock actually, so to give me even more stability. So I'm as stable as I can be here. Concentrating the sanding right in that centre. You can see already the centre point is virtually vanished.
Very nice.
I've got a little bit more to sand away. And as I've undercut that, I've got to just angle it slightly too, because I've got a curved edge on my pad, obviously. So just sand that away very gently. And do it from a couple of different angles so you don't get any sort of hard bumps and ridges. Okay, so that's done at 120.
This demo is like perfection at its best.
180 grit, smooth it out.
Best thing about this, folks, it is free. And you can be part of it. Just sign up. Say you want to be part of the demos.
Okay, so that's sanding that to 180. From there, I'll just go by hand. I could put a 240 grit pad in there and so on, but it's a very small area to sand. That's 240, so I can just do this section by hand. The advantage of doing it by hand on any bowl you do, or the base of anything you do, you can sand with the grain, and as I'm sure you all know, you sand with the grain and it's much less noticeable. If you're sanding with any sort of thing that's moving in one direction, you put sanding lines in that direction. So this way I can either sand it in a rotary manner like that, or I can sand it with the grain, which is along the axis of the bowl. So that's done at 240, then to 320.
$400.
I'm
Members,
shocked
if
by
you haven't
sheen
seen
from
it-
that wax.
And then
This
finish
is
at
a-
400.
This is a seasoned Turner sharing his ideas with you.
That knot turned out quite nice. You see, there's a little bit of a void in the knot. I'm not sure how well the camera
Yeah,
shows
you
that.
can
There's a
see
little
it.
bit of a hole in the knot, but what comes through the other side is just literally a 2mm or so hole. So if I'd have gone any farther on the top surface, I probably would have had a bigger hole. So that's worked out quite fortunately on that. Right, so I'm just going to use my brush and get rid of all that dust off the back. I've still got a bit of wax on my pad, so all I'm going to do is put some wax on that center section that I've just sanded away. Not too worried about putting sanding sealer on that bit. Just wax is fine on there, I think. And then get my buffing pad and just buff that out. So that's it, done. So bottom
Wow.
surface finish, got a reasonable shine on it. I mean, I quite like the wax finish. It's a good sheen rather than a high shine is what I tend to describe it as. And there's the front face of it. some nice figuring in there.
What a
Thickness
fantastic.
wise, you can
demo.
see there on the edge, it's I don't know, 3 millimeters. It does thin out a bit on the wings actually to about 2, but and there's just an odd bit of paper stuck on the edge. Those little fuzzy bits on the edge, bits of paper and things like that. Tip for getting rid of those. Get a couple of shoe brushes and just go over the edge with a shoe brush, and that takes all those little bits of fuzz and whatever off it.
Oh, what a fantastic demo. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. So that's it. I'll show you one of those logs before we go. Give me a second. I'll go and drag one out because I mean, although I've said about this radial pattern, I think it's one of those things that you've got to see it for yourself. It's quite something. Right, just give me a second. I just need to find the log. Oh, there it is. Just got to rearrange my workshop to get to it. I should have got this out earlier. I didn't think of it earlier, but I thought, yeah, why not? Right then. Everything else is resting on that.
All good, Paul. All good.
When I see you incredible turners turning those in units, it always makes my heart stop. I hold my breath while you're doing it and say, boy, if I was doing that, it would be a red-green comedy.
Yeah, there's a few sort of heart stopping, but this is the outside of one of these logs, and you can see this is they take the bark off it. But if you look at it end on, you see that radial pattern.
Yeah. Look at those rays and figure.
I'll just try and wet it a little bit.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, you can see that pattern radiates out and the figuring radiates out.
Wow.
Wonderful.
That's some pretty wood.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice stuff.
It's a fantastic demonstration and learned a lot from it.
Good.
Yeah, there was a lot of great technique here. I hope a lot of folks picked up on that.
Thanks, Paul. I enjoyed it through and through.
Good, thank you.
You know, it's pretty good, because Paul came through, with like 36 hours notice.
Yeah, it was last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, and what is it, like 2 o'clock in the morning there?
2:45.
Wow.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, a bit of a late night, but there you go. I don't have to get up for work until 7:30, so I'll be fine.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
welcome.
Great job, Paul.